At exactly 0600 hours every morning, rain or shine, a man pushed a battered red mower across the grass bordering Fort Briar's barracks road. He wore the same thing each day: faded jeans, a dull green field jacket 2 sizes too large, and tan combat boots that looked like they'd been on more miles than most military Humvees. A plain black cap shielded his face from the sun. No insignia, no name. His movements were slow but not weak. He cut in precise lines, always starting from the east side, always finishing at the memorial wall. The mower rattled like it was held together with duct tape and stubbornness. Few people asked his name. Fewer cared. To most of the base's new recruits, he was just part of the scenery, like the utility sheds or the cracked sidewalk along the mess hall. Some called him Old Man Mower, but most favored a more irreverent nickname, Sarge Grass. He probably got kicked out years ago. One private muttered during a morning jog, "Now he's playing soldier with a lawnmower." "Bet he never made it past PFC," another added. "Looks like he's been trimming grass since Vietnam." A sergeant barked at them to move along, but even he smirked. The old man didn't respond. He never did. He just kept mowing. Nobody knew when exactly he'd started showing up. The records didn't show any maintenance detail under his name. Fort Briar had outsourced groundskeeping to a private company years ago, but they only showed up once a month, and they missed more than they cleaned. The old man filled the gaps, quietly, methodically. If a sign was crooked, he straightened it. If trash blew into the flower beds, he picked it up. If weeds grew near the flagpole, he cut them by hand. And then there was the anthem. Every morning at 0800 sharp, the loudspeakers crackled to life. The star-spangled banner filled the air as the flag was raised by the rotating honor guard. It was during one such morning, with dew still clinging to the blades of grass, that the old man stopped his mower, stepped away from the handle, and stood at attention. Perfect attention. His heels clicked, his back straightened by muscle memory, not vanity. His hand rose in a salute, sharp, crisp, and so hauntingly precise that even the drill sergeant paused mid-yell. A group of recruits waiting nearby for morning orders noticed. One of them, Private Ellis, pulled out his phone. He snapped a photo and posted it to his private account with the caption, "Stolen valor much? Grandpa thinks he's Eisenhower." The likes rolled in fast. So did the jokes. "Is that a cosplay? Can't believe he's saluting with a weed whacker. Bet he calls his mower Alpha Unit." Ellis didn't think much of it. None of them did. The man didn't react. As always, he finished his work, wiped down the mower, and stored it in a rusting utility shed near the old south fence, then disappeared down the footpath leading out of the base. No fanfare, no fuss, just silence. Lieutenant Aldridge, newly posted to Fort Briar's administrative division, noticed the chatter about the unauthorized civilian mowing base property. He flagged it during a Monday morning security debrief. "There's someone accessing the perimeter grounds daily, with no credentials," he said, scrolling through Ellis's now viral post. This could be a liability. No one at the table recognized the man. No one could find his name in any official list. He wasn't on contract. He hadn't registered for base access. "He's either local or confused," Aldridge said. "Either way, it's a breach." Captain Moore leaned back. "He's been doing this for how long?" "Hard to say," Aldridge replied. "Some of the older guys claim it's been years." "And nobody's questioned it?" "Well," the lieutenant shrugged, "nobody's complained. Until now." And next morning, 2 MPs approached the man while he was trimming around the base chapel. He looked up as they arrived, but didn't stop his work until they spoke. "Sir, do you have authorization to be on base property?" He shut off the mower letting its sputtering engine die into silence. Then, calmly, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and handed them a folded piece of paper, a yellowed, soft-edged DD-214 certificate of release from active duty. It was dated 1992. The name? Henry Cole. He didn't say a word. He just waited. "Mr. Cole," one of the MPs said, looking over the document, "this paper is no longer valid for access. I'm going to need you to come with us to clear things up." Cole gave a faint nod. He didn't protest. He didn't explain. He followed them. They took him to the security office, where Lieutenant Aldridge met him at the desk with a strained smile. "We appreciate your service, Mr. Cole," he began, holding up the DD-214 mower. "But this document doesn't give you base clearance anymore." Henry remained seated, his cap on his knee. Aldridge continued, "You're not registered with any current contractors. You don't have identification. You've been accessing restricted areas. You understand that's a concern." "I entered through the foot gate," Cole said, voice low but clear. "It hasn't been locked for years." "Well, it will be now," Aldridge replied. "With respect, you can't just show up and do this. It's not authorized." "I wasn't looking for authorization," Henry said. The lieutenant exhaled. "We'll have to escort you off base, and we'll need to keep the equipment." Henry didn't argue. When they walked him out the main gate, he nodded at the guards like old acquaintances. They returned the gesture awkwardly, not quite sure why. Private Ellis, walking past with his squad for afternoon drills, saw the scene unfold. A sliver of guilt slid through him, but he shook it off. He shouldn't have been here, Anne, Ellis thought. Rules are rules. What he didn't notice was the older staff sergeant across the field, watching the scene with narrowed eyes, his jaw tight. That night, Ellis opened his phone and saw the latest post on a veterans discussion board. The photo was familiar. It was his, actually. Henry Cole being escorted off base. But this time, the top comment didn't mock him. It read, "That's Lieutenant General Henry Cole, 3 stars, Afghanistan, former commander of Fort Briar. That man trained more leaders than you'll ever meet. Show some damn respect." And below it, thousands of likes. Comments from other veterans poured in. "He's a legend. I owe my career to him. He's the reason I came home." Ellis felt his stomach drop. He had mocked a war hero. No, he had mocked his war hero. The base went quiet after the video, not in volume, but in energy. Soldiers still marched. Commands still rang out. Rifles still fired on the training field. But there was a strange hush, like something sacred had been touched without permission. Private Ellis didn't say much that morning. He kept his head down during drills, stayed off his phone, and avoided the gaze of his sergeant, who had reviewed the security report earlier that day and didn't say a word. But the silence was loud. In the officers' wing, it was even louder. Captain Morgan Garrison returned to Fort Briar 2 days earlier than scheduled. His meetings at the Pentagon had ended sooner than expected. When he arrived, his assistant handed him a folder with "Security Incident, Civilian Trespass" scrawled across the front. He opened it, expecting a harmless misunderstanding. Then he saw the name. His face went still. Lieutenant General Henry Cole, retired. He turned the page. A photo paper clipped to the top corner showed Cole being escorted off base. He wasn't resisting, just walking. Chin lifted, eyes forward, just like he used to walk into battle briefings. Garrison stared at the photo for a long time. Then he stood and called for the jeep. They found Henry Cole sitting on a bench outside a small diner in town, stirring sugar into a black coffee. He didn't look surprised to see Garrison. "Didn't think they'd send you," he said. "They didn't," Garrison replied. Henry nodded. The two men sat in silence for a moment, a low hum of traffic filling the space between them. You could have told them, Garrison said. Told them what? Who you are. Henry sipped his coffee. Doesn't matter who I was. Not if they can't see who I am. Garrison looked at him. He didn't argue. You shouldn't have been escorted off base. Henry shrugged. You'd have done the same back in your captain days. Rulebook said so. Yeah, Garrison muttered, but I'd have been wrong then too. That afternoon, a base-wide directive was issued. Mandatory formation, all personnel, parade field, 1700 hours, full dress uniform. No exceptions. Speculation bloomed like wildfire. Deployment orders, emergency inspection, change in command? No one guessed the truth. At 1659 hours, the entire population of Fort Briar stood at attention on the parade field. From rookies who'd arrived last week to hardened veterans, everyone stood sweating under stiff collars. At 1703, a military jeep rolled up the main road and stopped beside the platform. The door opened. Out stepped Henry Cole. No uniform, just a button-down shirt, his old boots, and a clean shave. His eyes were steady, his pace was measured, and yet every movement felt like a return. Colonel Garrison stepped up to the mic. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Colonel Morgan Garrison, current commanding officer of Fort Briar. He began. In my absence, a man was removed from this base. A man who had walked these grounds daily for 7 years. A man many of you passed without a second glance. He gestured to Henry. This is Lieutenant General Henry Cole, former commander of this base. 3 decades of service. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Distinguished Service Cross. Architect of the Joint Survival Training Program, used across every branch today. Gasps rippled through the formation. Several soldiers straightened instinctively. For years, he returned, not to inspect, not to be honored, but to cut the grass, pick up trash, straighten signs. Not because he had to, but because he believed this base deserved to be sharp. Even when no one was watching. Silence. Then Garrison turned, faced Henry, and gave a salute. Not a polite gesture. A full, regulation, chest-high salute. Permission to continue following your example, sir? Henry held his gaze, then returned the salute, crisp and silent. Permission granted, Colonel. It broke something open. One by one, officers stepped forward and saluted. Some with pride, others with guilt. Then, quietly from the third row, Private Ellis moved. He walked forward, face pale, and stood before Henry. He raised his hand. Sir, he said, voice tight, I'm sorry for what I said, for what I posted. I didn't know. Henry didn't flinch. You spoke from what you saw, he said, but not from what you knew. Next time, look harder. He paused. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The soldier makes the uniform. Ellis nodded, blinking hard, then stepped back into formation, his posture straighter than ever. That night, Garrison called a late meeting. We failed, he said, looking around the room of senior staff, not just as leaders, as soldiers. He held up the printout of the viral post. We ignored the presence of one of our finest because he wore work boots instead of dress shoes, because he pushed a mower instead of a strategy. The room remained quiet. So now we fix it. By dawn, a team of engineers was at the eastern gate of Fort Briar. They installed a new pedestal. A freshly cleaned Toro mower was placed on it, bolted in place. Next to it, a bronze plaque read, "In honor of Lieutenant General Henry Cole, who never left his post." That evening, a silent procession formed. Soldiers from every unit came to see it. Some placed challenge coins. Others left dog tags or handwritten notes. Private Ellis returned that night, stood before the plaque, and whispered, "I'll do better." And for the first time in a long while, he meant it. The plaque changed everything. Not in a dramatic, movie scene kind of way. There were no trumpets, no salutes from the president, no headlines. But the mood at Fort Briar shifted. The way soldiers spoke near the east gate, the way they stood straighter during morning colors, even the way they cleaned up after themselves in the mess hall, subtle, quiet, but real. Because now they knew. Private Ellis couldn't shake the feeling in his gut. Every time he passed the gate, he read the words again. Who never left his post. It wasn't just a phrase. It was an indictment. He began showing up early, volunteered for tasks most people avoided, like cleaning latrine equipment or organizing storage units. He even asked to take over the eastern perimeter detail for 2 weeks. He wanted to walk where Henry walked, not to imitate, but to understand. It was a Thursday morning when Ellis knocked on the porch rail of a small home just off base. Henry sat on a wooden chair, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The porch was neat. A single American flag hung to the left. A potted plant drooped quietly in the sun. "You don't need to stand like that," Henry said without looking. Ellis had unconsciously come to attention. "Habit, sir," Ellis replied. Henry motioned to the empty chair. "Sit." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Ellis finally spoke. "I wanted to ask why you came back." Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached beside his chair and pulled out a small tin box. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a folded letter. He passed it to Ellis. It was addressed but never sealed. The name read, Mrs. Leela Price. Ellis blinked. "This is a condolence letter." Henry nodded. "Matthew Price, 19. I made a decision that cost him his life. It was a clean op. No foul play. Just war." "You blame yourself?" "I led him," Henry said, voice steady. "That's enough." He explained how Matthew had trained at Fort Briar. How his mother had written a letter after the funeral, thanking Henry for being the last person her son trusted. How Henry wrote a response and rewrote it, over and over, but he never mailed it. "Guilt doesn't ask for closure," Henry said. "It asks for witness." Ellis held the letter carefully. "I could deliver it," he offered. Henry looked at him. "You're not doing it for me," he said. "I know," Ellis replied. "I'm doing it for her." That afternoon, Ellis mailed the letter. The return address wasn't Henry's. It was Fort Briar. But inside, he included a note of his own. "Your son trained on the field I now walk every day. He is remembered with every step." 3 days later, Henry received a package. Inside was a framed photo. It showed a young Private Matthew Price standing at Fort Briar's east gate, smiling. Behind him was the same mower Henry now kept on a pedestal. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a note. "Thank you for walking where he once stood." Ellis began visiting every week. Sometimes he helped in the garden behind the house. Other times they just sat. Henry didn't talk much, but when he did, his words stuck. Don't wait for orders to do what you know is right. You don't need rank to lead. You need consistency. Stand up for something even when no one salutes. Word spread through the base. Other soldiers began volunteering for the new Coal Watch. Detail, a rotating honor where enlisted men and women would clean, trim, and maintain the areas Henry once covered. It wasn't punishment. It was education. Sergeant Turner, the gruff, barrel-chested training NCO, spoke about it during a briefing. Discipline isn't about inspection, it's about investment. You think General Cole mowed grass because he liked the smell? He was preserving a standard. Nobody rolled their eyes, not anymore. One morning, Henry didn't show up to the porch. Ellis arrived to find the door ajar, the coffee cup untouched. He knocked gently, called out. From the back, Henry's voice replied, "Out here." Ellis stepped around the house and found him kneeling by the memorial garden. A single name plaque sat at the center. Matthew Price. Henry was clearing weeds by hand. I never added him to the wall on base, he said. Thought I'd done enough damage. Ellis didn't answer. He knelt beside him and started pulling weeds. They worked in silence until the sun was overhead. Later that week, Colonel Garrison called a meeting with the entire officer corps. He held up the framed photo Henry had received. "This is why we lead," he said. "Not for medals, not for promotion, for legacy." He pointed to the plaque at the gate. "That man walked this base longer than any of us. Not because he had to, but because he believed it still mattered." Then quietly, he said, "Let's make sure it does." From that day on, every base newcomer was given an unusual assignment during orientation. Walk the perimeter, learn the history of the plaque, and return with one sentence about what it means to lead when no one is watching. The base buzzed with renewed purpose. The coal watch wasn't just a routine anymore. It had become a point of quiet pride. The soldiers chosen for the week-long honor walked their routes with awareness, not obligation. They checked edges that others missed. Cleaned corners no one ever pointed out. Not because they feared inspection, but because they knew someone once did it without being asked. And Private Ellis, now a full specialist, had become the silent heartbeat of the shift. He still visited Henry every Sunday. Their conversations weren't always about war or duty. Sometimes they spoke about tomatoes, or rain, or birds that nested behind Henry's old tool shed. But one morning, Ellis asked a question that hung between them like a shadow. "Do you think it would have been different if you hadn't ordered the move that day?" Henry didn't ask what he meant. He knew. "Different," Henry said. "Yes. Better? No one can say." He leaned forward in his chair. "I've made calls that saved lives, and others that cost them, and sometimes they're the same call." Henry told him the full story then. It was Kandahar, 2005. Their convoy was supposed to stop at checkpoint Red Echo. The terrain was volatile. Dusty hills, tight corners, too much shadow. Intel suggested an IED trap, so Henry rerouted the team to Bravo Ridge. It was a safer path. Until it wasn't. An RPG struck the lead Humvee. Private Matthew Price was inside. He died before the second blast could even be heard. It was the right call, Henry said, but it had the wrong result. Ellis sat still, hands on his knees. "And that's why you came back here?" Henry nodded. "This was the last place he trained. If I couldn't save him in the field, I'd honor him here." Later that week, a letter arrived for Henry. It was from Leela Price, Matthew's mother. She wrote in neat cursive, careful lines that trembled only slightly. "I never blamed you. I blamed the war. I blamed the sky. I blamed the silence. But I never blamed you." She enclosed a photograph. Matthew, age 6, holding a plastic toy rifle, standing beside a sign that read, "Fort Briar Youth Day." At the bottom, she wrote, "He wanted to serve before he even understood why. Thank you for remembering him when so many have forgotten." Henry read the letter twice, then folded it, placed it in the tin box, and closed the lid with care. That evening, Ellis returned to the eastern perimeter walk. He carried no tools, just a notepad. He sat on the small bench near the plaque and began writing. "The grass doesn't know who steps on it. The dirt doesn't remember who falls on it. But we do." He paused, then continued. "Legacy isn't about your name being printed. It's about your absence being noticed." Colonel Garrison saw the shift, too. He began making structural changes. He removed automated vendor contracts for landscaping and reassigned responsibility for base upkeep into a voluntary service initiative called Ground Honor. It had one rule: no rank exemptions. Everyone, officers included, would serve a shift once a quarter. Cleaning, trimming, repairing. If it was good enough for a general, Garrison said, It's good enough for us. Henry, for his part, remained quiet. He didn't ask for more attention. He didn't show up to ceremonies. But people visited his porch. Young soldiers came with notebooks and respectful curiosity. He never told them how to lead. He told them how to return. Return to what matters. Return when no one expects it. Return even if you were forgotten. One dusk, Ellis arrived to find Henry in his garden, sitting on a small stool beside a flowering bush. In his hand was a dog tag. Ellis sat beside him, wordless. "He gave me this the day before we deployed," Henry said. "Said it was for luck." "Did it work?" Henry smiled, sad and steady. "Not for him." The next morning, a new addition appeared at the base memorial wall. It was a simple brass plate installed beneath the larger names. PVT, Matthew Price. Never left our thoughts. No announcement was made. But by noon, it was covered with small stones, handwritten notes, and challenge coins. One recruit placed a small laminated photo of the mower. That Friday, Colonel Garrison called Ellis into his office. "We've been reviewing your record," he said. Ellis stiffened. Garrison held up a manila folder. "Before I make this official, I want to know, why do you do what you do?" Ellis thought for a moment. "Because someone showed me that service doesn't end at discharge." Garrison nodded. "Good," he said, and handed him the file. Inside was a promotion order. Specialist Ellis, Corporal Ellis, signed and sealed. Ellis didn't smile. He just nodded. "Thank you, sir." That night at 2100 hours, Corporal Ellis walked the perimeter. He passed the mower statue, paused, saluted, and whispered, not just for himself. "Still here, still walking." It began with a simple form on the bulletin board outside Admin Hall. Poll watch sign-up, weekly volunteer rotation, groundkeeping, base perimeter maintenance, memorial duty. No rank required. No excuses accepted. Within 2 days, every slot for the next 3 months was filled. Soldiers once used to grumble about extra duty, but coal watch was different. It wasn't punishment. It was pilgrimage. Newcomers were briefed during orientation. You're not just cutting grass. You're walking behind a man who led with more silence than speeches. Stay sharp. Keep it clean. No shortcuts. Some arrived early for their shift. Some stayed late. There were no medals for it. No evaluations. But something unspoken settled into the culture of Fort Briar. A new kind of pride, born not from show, but from stewardship. Corporal Ellis began collecting stories, not official ones, personal ones. Soldiers submitted notes anonymously to a locked box outside his office. He called the initiative Echoes of Coal. One note read, "He showed me what leadership looks like without an audience." Another, "I once saw him fix a broken light on the perimeter path, alone, at night, no flashlight, didn't ask anyone for." Another still, "I mocked him, now I clean his path every week." Ellis compiled them into a monthly newsletter, read aloud during Friday briefings. He kept them anonymous, but everyone listened, even the officers, especially the officers. Colonel Garrison instituted a new policy, coal standard. Any inspection of base facilities must meet the level of care shown by General Cole. If he maintained it alone for 7 years, we can match that with a full staff. It wasn't a rule out of reverence. It was a challenge, and it raised the bar. The contractors noticed. So did the civilians. Fort Briar began earning a reputation, not just for training quality, but for precision, pride. The kind of pride that isn't hung on a wall, but grown into muscle. It didn't stop there. News of Coal Watch spread through military channels. Fort Ashby in North Dakota started a similar program. Then Fort Gray, then 2 Air Force installations. By spring, 12 military bases across 4 states had adopted the model. They called it the General's Path. A base commander from Fort Ashby even flew in to meet Henry. He shook his hand firmly. "We started doing it because we thought it was honorable," the commander said. "But now, I think it's necessary." Henry only said, "Then keep it sharp." The most surprising visitor came from Washington. Senator Elaine Archer, chair of the Armed Services Committee, arrived unannounced on a muggy Tuesday morning. She requested no ceremony, no escort, just one meeting with Henry. They sat on the porch, no reporters, just coffee and 2 people who understood different kinds of service. "You've sparked a movement," she told him. He gave a soft grunt. "I didn't intend to." "All the better," she said. "True leadership never starts with self." She presented a small box. Inside, the Congressional Civil Contribution Medal. Henry looked at it, ran a thumb across the etching, then closed the box and handed it back. "I'm honored, but I already have what I need." Ellis later asked him why he didn't keep it. Henry replied, "Because symbols fade, standards don't." That line made it into the next Echoes of Coal and stayed there permanently, printed on the top of every issue. Back at Fort Briar, the mural was unveiled. It stretched across the southern wall of Admin Hall, a wide, quiet painting of an early sunrise with a silhouette of a man behind a mower, surrounded by fields of green. No name, no face, just presence. At the bottom were 5 words: "He never left his post." It became a landmark. Visitors came to see it. Recruits posed beside it. Some even cried, not because of the image, but because of what it demanded. Henry remained unchanged. He still watered his garden at 0600, still wore the same jacket, still walked the same path to the store, nodding at neighbors who now looked at him with a different kind of reverence. Ellis, now a sergeant, visited weekly. Sometimes he brought new recruits with him, not for introductions, but for insight. He would sit quietly while Henry talked about accountability, not command, about owning your shadow, not chasing your glory. One young soldier asked him, "Sir, what's the one thing you tell someone like me?" Henry thought, then said, "Show up. Every day, especially when nobody's watching." That line made it to Fort Ashby's wall, then Fort Gray's, then to the Navy Training Center in Florida. Across the country, a quiet revolution was taking root, not with banners, with footsteps. One evening, Henry didn't come out to the porch. Ellis knocked, waited, no answer. He circled around back and found Henry asleep in the chair by his garden, a notebook open in his lap. On the page, only one sentence was written: "The work is not the weight, the forgetting is." That week, Fort Briar launched a new tradition. Every Friday night, the youngest soldier on base would walk the perimeter at sunset. Alone, when they reached the east gate, they would stand before the plaque, salute, and whisper 5 words: "I never left my post." Then they would return and carry on. Henry Cole passed away on a Wednesday morning. There was no final salute, no last words, no dramatic fade-out. He simply didn't wake up. A neighbor saw the porch light still on past noon, the coffee mug untouched, the morning paper still folded. She knocked, then waited, then called Fort Briar. Colonel Garrison himself drove over. Henry was found in his favorite chair, his hands resting on a worn notebook. The pages were filled with observations, lists, notes. Nothing profound, just tasks, reminders, people's names. But on the last page, scrawled in uncharacteristically shaky handwriting, were 5 words: "Still here, still on watch." The base fell silent, not out of command, out of instinct. No one told the drill sergeants to ease their tone that morning. No one had to. At 1400 hours, Colonel Garrison addressed the entire base. There was no eulogy, no ceremonial speech, just a photo of Henry projected on the screen behind him, sitting on his porch, in his boots, holding a cup of coffee, watching the road. Garrison simply said, "He never left his post. Now it's our turn." The funeral was held 3 days later. The chapel overflowed, not just with soldiers, with neighbors, veterans, teenagers, officers from other bases who'd adopted the general's path. A few arrived in full dress blues. Most came in simple uniforms. Some came in boots and jeans, in tribute. There were no honorary pallbearers. The base insisted on carrying the casket themselves, not by rank, but by rotation. Each man and woman who carried it had served a week on coal watch, had walked Henry's path, had picked up his tools. They laid him to rest in the veterans section of the town cemetery, beside others who served with distinction. His headstone was simple. Lieutenant General Henry Cole. He never left his post. Back at Fort Briar, things didn't go back to normal, because Henry Cole had redefined what normal meant. The Cole Watch continued. The mural was lit at night now, and the Echoes of Cole newsletter became a quarterly publication shared across 15 military installations. It was no longer just a story. It was doctrine, unwritten but deeply understood. Every Friday at 2100 hours, the tradition held strong. The youngest active-duty soldier, sometimes barely old enough to shave, walked the perimeter, alone, in full gear. They carried nothing but a small card with Henry's name on it. When they reached the east gate, they stood at attention before the plaque. They saluted, and they whispered, "I never left my post." Sergeant Ellis now taught leadership seminars. He began every session with a photo of Henry and 5 minutes of silence. No lecture, no slides, just silence. Then he'd ask, "What does leadership sound like when no one's listening?" The answers changed every time, but the weight of the question never did. On the first Veterans Day after Henry's passing, Fort Briar invited his only known relative, a niece from out west, to attend the ceremony. She had never seen him in uniform, only as the quiet uncle who sent birthday cards and once taught her how to change a tire. She stood beside Colonel Garrison at the podium and read from a note Henry had left in his will. "Tell them I didn't do this for legacy, or history, or reputation. I did it because someone had to, and I still believed in the place I once led." She folded the paper, looked out over the crowd. "Now he believes in all of you." That night, Ellis walked the perimeter. He wasn't the youngest soldier anymore, not by a long shot, but he had requested the walk personally. Just this once. When he reached the gate, he didn't stop at the plaque. He stepped beyond it, out toward the field Henry once tended by hand, the blades of grass catching silver in the moonlight. He turned, saluted the base, then whispered, "Rest easy, sir. We've got it from here."
This audio is made with Audio Toolkit for Windows Store, downloaded for free now.